So, award season is coming up. Chi-Con is in September. It's where the Hugo Awards will be presented. What do you think about the whole award scene?
Awards are an interesting animal. I think that because, in the kidlit industry, there's a ton of awards, but there are some really big ones, the Prince and the Caldecott and that sort of thing. And I think that, in some cases, I get a little bit confused sometimes about why a book wins over another book. But I'm not on those panels. I don't know what the judges are looking for. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know how they're scoring things. So sometimes it's like I'm rooting for a book and then it doesn't win, and the book that won is fine, but I get a little bit flummoxed about, well, why didn't this other book win? But again, I think it goes back to the flavors that we prefer and who nominates, right? Who's actually nominating these books or getting them onto the reading lists for the judges? How do they,
It's interesting when you have a panel of judges. So, for instance, the Caldecott, I believe, is a panel of judges. Hugo's are a little bit different in that the voting is open to anybody who is a member of the World Science Fiction Convention. Basically, you get a membership by signing up and saying, hey, I'll pay my money and come to the convention. And then you get a ballot. So, on the one hand, it is, in a way, very fan responsive, because who goes to Worldcon but fans? On the other hand, it tends to be a little bit selective in that the people who have the wherewithal to go to the con, to sign up for a membership, tend to self-select a great deal. You're either a hardcore fan and you save all year to do this, or you have a certain level of income or level of interest, oftentimes because you're an author or a publisher, that gets you there. I've been to a couple, more by knowing someone who got me in the door as a panelist or as a presenter, and then paying my money and going to the con. I've always wondered who actually makes the nominations, because that's a little different. That's a committee that does that within the convention structure. And while I didn't support the whole sad puppies thing a number of years ago, I understood their point of view. I have read most of the books on this year's list. And while some of them I greatly liked, are they award-winning books? I don't know, because I don't know what the standards are here. It's kind of like the Oscars, It's like, who's popular?
And I was just going to say, we see some awards out there, even in the kidlit industry, that are clearly popularity contests.
Yeah.
And especially when it's the membership or the fans voting, it's, how many people know you or know of you or, that sort of thing. So, but I will say that there are some really good books out there that do get nominated and that win these awards. Sometimes though, I'm a little confused about, how they categorize books, because I've seen some Prince awards that clearly I didn't see as YA books, and the Prince is specifically for YA. So I don't know how they determine some of that, but
now you're getting into how do you define genre and
well, category for kidlit, yeah. It's not just genre.
But I mean category. Those lines have gotten so blurred that I'm not really sure I would put much weight on that. Science fiction and fantasy, again, there's a lot of blurring there. I mean, are you a hard science fiction fan, or are you a,
space
opera or a classic fantasy? I think some of these books get nominated just because either their world building or their premise is weird and barely comprehensible, and therefore they must be works of genius. It's like, I've read some of these, like, I have a hard time following this book. Why is this an award winner?
I'm going to have to pull the list and read some of those, that because I haven't really been following. I don't follow awards that closely ahead of time. What I do is I wait to see who wins, and then I select out a few to see what I think of the winners, and that's how I usually treat awards.
I do that a little more this year and last year because I anticipated maybe going to the convention and voting on these things. Made a point of reading a significant number of these things. In the end, I decided there are a lot of reasons I don't really want to be still involved in that particular scene. But the books that were nominated range from what I consider just absolutely brilliant. Okay, yes, you really deserve that nomination. To why?
Well, and also, the other piece to that too is there are so many books. It's so hard to read all the books. And in the kid-lit industry, I don't always know what's nominated till it's nominated. I don't know what's going to be nominated. I'm just reading. I'm just grabbing and reading, and that's how I do. And then I'll root for books if a book I loved gets nominated. But
well, that's kind of the other side of this, because I didn't really understand why some of the nominations were what they were. I've read other books in the course of the year that I thought were more deserving that didn't get a nomination. Either because the author is a little bit obscure, or it's a first-time author, or, dare I say it, an author that has political views that are not particularly acceptable, but I found their book immensely enjoyable and satisfying.
yeah,
I'm not going to name names.
sometimes it's hard to separate.
There were a couple of those where there was a unique premise, a unique voice, great world building, but the point of view was not what we would consider necessarily our mainstream appropriate viewpoint. And I don't mean that they were, far left and more far right than anything, or what people would call the right, what I would call libertarian. But, they're just kind of dropped like a stone because this isn't what the nominating committee wants to read. Now, I'm not playing sour grapes. These were excellent books in their own right, and I'm not sure why they didn't get a nomination.
Right.
Meanwhile, and to name a name, Andy Weir gets a nomination for the Hail Mary Project, which was a good book, but nowhere near The Martian. And I think he got nominated just on the strength of his popularity with The Martian and then the movie and then everything else. Hail Mary Project is a fine book, but it's not of that quality.
Gotcha.
Meanwhile, say Becky Chambers.
I love Becky Chambers.
Her latest Wayfarer book, which was nominated, is fun to read. I don't think it's particularly brilliant in terms of breaking new ground in terms of new ideas.
And there are people who don't get it, I will say.
But her kind of gentle, optimistic sci-fi, to me, is appealing.
It's enjoyable.
It's enjoyable to read.
Yeah.
And I get the appeal. Not particularly radical or groundbreaking, but certainly a different take on the usual space opera or conflict-based sci-fi.
Yeah. Although that book, Space Opera, was hysterical. Have you read that book?
Yes,
I don't remember who wrote it, but that is a hysterical book.
But that's just playing with
funny.
all of the
tropes. I know, but it was funny. It was fun. It was such a pleasure to read. Well, speaking of reading, what have we been reading this summer?
Oh dear, summer reads. Let's see. I have actually gotten away from sci-fi and fantasy, and have been reading a lot of detective stories. Now, I'm currently writing essentially a spy novel set in a different time, so it makes sense. I have, like I did read Andy Weir's book. I read Becky Chambers' most of her Wayfarer series, starting with A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and read it through the universe, galaxy of the universe, and everything, or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And it was interesting the way she segued from one group of characters in one book to a minor character, but then major character in the next book, but in the same universe. I really kind of how she pivoted that.
Well,
and
it's such a large universe to play in.
Yeah.
So she really took advantage of that and took us on multiple journeys across that expanse, which was really enjoyable.
Another fun read was Silver Swift. It's by Holly Palance. No, it's by Natalie Lloyd, narrated by Holly Palance. It's a take on the old Selkie legend.
Oh, nice.
And a woman who is the granddaughter of a Selkie who chose to be human. And her trying to rediscover her roots. It's a fun read. It's set on an island off the coast of Carolina, which appealed to me greatly because that's one of my favorite playgrounds. But she gets the kind of island attitude right. Mm-hmm. And, it treats it well, not just as these are a bunch of rednecks who, happen to live on these islands, but